If you are using litter, the best window of application to get maximum benefit from litter is 2 to 3 weeks before planting. Okay, if you're applying 6 months before planting, probably you are not getting much nutrient value.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast. I'm your host, Leo Bastos, Assistant Professor in Integrative Precision Agriculture at the University of Georgia. Today, we welcome our guest, Dr. Rishi Prasad. He's an Associate Professor and Nutrient Management Extension Specialist at Auburn University. Rishi, welcome to the Crop Science Podcast. And could you share with the audience a little bit about your background and your path to where you are now?
Thank you, Leo. I really appreciate for the invitation as well as the opportunity to talk today. About some of the things like phosphorus stratification that we are going to talk about in a bit. But to start with, let me tell you where I started, where my journey started. I'm from India, and I did a bachelor's degree in agricultural sciences from India's topmost agricultural university. And I had quite a bit of fascination that I developed as I was doing my undergrad in agriculture, about helping farmers, those people who are in this noble profession, I will say, to feed the world. This world cannot survive without eating a single day. So I had a very profound interest in helping them, and that's why most of my research work actually is focused on applied research. But after I finished my bachelor's in agricultural sciences, I decided to come to United States to pursue higher education, and then I came to West Virginia University, where I did my master's in agronomy. And after that, I decided to continue my studies, and then came to University of Florida for my PhD in soil water science. In soil water science department, I had a really great time. We worked on leaching of nitrogen from these sandy soils in commercial farms, that were growing corn and sweet corn and like vegetables, as well as commercial row crops as well. And in Florida, water quality, especially like nitrate and phosphorus in water, is a big issue. And then we are trying to find or develop best management practices, which we call as BMPs, to reduce the loading of these nutrients into the groundwater. And these groundwaters are feeding the springs, and if the loading rate of these nutrients from agricultural lands are pretty high, then it causes algal blooms and the water quality deteriorates. So I worked quite a bit in understanding like what is causing these leaching losses, and how much is this leaching losses happening from commercial farms. And we also took the help of crop models such as DSAT, and try to figure out like what are the prominent pathways through which nitrogen is being lost from these commercial row crop systems. And then we also looked into the interventions on how to kind of minimize these losses. I mean, you cannot stop them completely, it's completely like impossible. And that's why we say like, how do we minimize them, and what are those best management practices that we need to be looking at in order to minimize these losses. And of course, in any agricultural system, especially an irrigated system, you have fertilizer and you have water. And if you can manage water, you can manage fertilizer as well, especially in a sandy soil arena. So we came up with some really nice best management practices, and again, this is to help farmer. And we provided them the information that by reducing irrigation amounts and frequency, they can save water, and they can also reduce leaching of nitrogen. So that was a very fascinating work. And then I ended up getting a little bit more into the modeling world, crop modeling, and then decided to stay in biosystems engineering, and ran some potato models on a global scale. We had data collected across globe, and we were looking into calibrating these models and how can we come up with the best management practices for model as well. And we're looking at ambient temperature, elevated CO2 and temperature, and future climate, and all those kind of stuff. um, and after I finished my postdoc, both in biosystems engineering and agronomy department in Florida, I was offered a position in Michigan in agricultural technology company, and the goal was to build nitrogen prescription of the Midwest farms using satellite images. So it was a very high computation. Um, and we developed the model, and then model can just on a click of a button you can come up with a variable rate prescription, and then you download it and load it in your computer and just you know go and apply that. So we had quite a great success, but then I decided to come back to an academic setting. I mean, I enjoyed in industry, but I felt like I needed to work more in a broader perspective, and then I joined USDA ARS at Penn State. And we had quite a exciting time there at Penn State as well, working on crop simulation models, integrated crop livestock farms, looking into not just a nutrient but also from a integrated approach, where you have manure being produced in the farm and being circulated to produce the crop. So it was very fascinating study. And then we also looked into some climate change studies, like how corn is going to respond to a changing climate. What's going to happen if the temperature rises by +5 degrees or +6 degrees in future. And then we did some of those work, and eventually I came back to Auburn because I was missing the South.
Yeah,
So I came back to Auburn as an assistant professor and extension specialist for nutrient management. And here I've been in Auburn since 2017 and working on several projects related to managing nutrients, especially from poultry production side, because Alabama is number second in poultry production in the entire United States. And of course, when you have a poultry state, you're also producing manure, which we call as broader litter. And this litter gets applied to row crop farms and pastures. And if somebody's applying litter from a very long time period, you get into these issues of buildup of phosphorus, which we call as legacy phosphorus as well. I mean, from the past activities, and that can lead to water quality issues. So we started investigating the storage capacities of the soil, looking into improving the phosphorus index of the soil. And at the same time, we're also optimizing nutrient applications. Like, say for example, a farmer applies like 2 tons of litter or 3 tons of litter for his corn or cotton production, and then the question was like, do we still need to apply the full rate of fertilizer, or should we cut back, and then how much we need to cut back? So all those kind of studies. And then recently we have also started investing into reducing greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions and development of organic fertilizers from animal manure. So it's a pretty broad sense of you can sense, like, the area and the diversity of research portfolio that I have right now. But it's very exciting. I'm a system scientist. I mean, I know crops, I know soils, I know the climate, and I'm trying to balance, agronomic production with the environmental, side of things, so that we avoid polluting our environment, but at the same time produce more to feed the world. So this is what I have. This is what my career trajectory and my current career goal and paths. Sorry, the career paths. This has been for the last, I will say, like more than 13 years in agriculture.
that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And it's really impressive how you have this breadth of experiences both in industry, academia, across different topics that in the end are all connected. Uh, but that normally, a lot of groups would look at them individually, but really bringing all of that connected as far as the nutrient side, the soil, the water quality, the loss side, of course, the yield, the profit, that are things that growers are looking into. Really connecting all that into your research program is something really exciting to see that you're working on that and also sharing that with our audience today. So one thing that I wanted to follow up is, so working with, Alabama, similarly in Georgia, so we do have a lot of uh, broiler litter available, especially in specific parts of the state. And how do you see this, perhaps this disconnect between the locations that are producing a lot of that litter and that normally would apply the litter closer to where it is produced, compared to perhaps these issues that you're studying as far as buildup of phosphorus in the soil and the implications that has? So is there any attempt of perhaps trying to find ways that first this large buildup doesn't happen, especially in the locations so close to where broiler litter is produced, but also more economical ways of getting that litter outside and make sure that it's being applied to fields that don't have that legacy phosphorus?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is a really good question, Leo. I mean, when I came to Auburn, Alabama, I mean, when I looked, the first thing that I decided to do was to truly understand the levels of phosphorus in the soil, especially like, that this is a poultry state. People are, um, like, poultry farmers are producing litter and it is being spread somewhere, right? It's going somewhere. So we wanted to understand, like, what is the phosphorus level we have currently and where they are distributed. And you're right, those areas where you have the poultry production, those are the areas we call them as high density poultry producing areas. And the surroundings or any farm or fields that are close to these areas, those are the ones that have been receiving or getting litter on a very frequent basis, because litter is bulky, and it's bulky, and if you want to transport it long distances, it becomes uneconomical pretty quickly. There are some studies where they say, like, any litter that crosses 80 miles of boundary, it's almost like expensive, where you can buy fertilizer rather than applying chicken litter. Okay, so yes, this is a problem, and when somebody is applying litter repeatedly, year after year after year, then it leads to buildup of phosphorus in the soil. And phosphorus is it's not mobile, just like nitrogen, where it starts, nitrogen moves downwards, but phosphorus typically sticks in the top surface, 2 or 3 inches of the surface, and it takes quite a time as well for the downward movement. And again, those things depend upon the soil type and all those kind of stuff. But to answer the question that you asked, like, what are the alternate ways of dealing with this situation? Because this repeated application of poultry litter in the same piece of land is not sustainable by any means. Actually, it's an environmental problem. When somebody is applying this, they're creating what we call as phosphorus hotspots. Okay, and when you create a hotspot, basically you have created a big legacy. Think about a big pot that is filled with phosphorus, and whenever it rains, it will and then depending upon, like, the slope and how close you are to a river or a waterways, this phosphorus will wash eventually, because phosphorus is, there's a pool of phosphorus. This is highly water soluble, so it dissolves pretty quickly with water, and then it moves with the water, and water eventually goes to a creek, to a river system, and then and when it happens, it start increasing the trophic or the nutrient concentration of that water body, and then eventually that water body is experience what we call as eutrophication. Okay, and when that happens, of course, things go in the wrong direction, because then you have all these environmental protection agencies that start looking at you and start finding who's doing this. So yeah, this creation of hotspot in close proximity where the litter is being generated and applied is a real problem. And then the other challenge is the economics. So recently, what my research team is, as we are investing our time and effort to come up with a fertilizer which can be derived from the poultry litter itself. Okay. And we have been successful in developing extractants as well, that we can extract nutrients out of the litter. And then we are also looking into some other conventional ways of making fertilizer out of chicken litter. And once you create like a very high density fertilizer, nutrient rich fertilizer, now you can transport it or sell it long distances, right? So that is one of the ways to deal with this litter issue. The other way is basically, promoting the beneficial use of litter. I mean, litter, I have seen when you apply on cornfield or cotton field or soybean field, you can immediately look at their response. I mean, litter has, it doesn't has only nutrients in it, but it also has a carbon, it also has microbes, and naturally it imparts or increases the microbial community or flora as well when you apply that in the soil. So you get that immediate boost of what we call as soil health, right? The effect of soil health, and that you see in the plant. Um, so so what I've been trying to also do is, we have been doing research where we are showing the beneficial use of poultry litter application on row crops. And now I have seen, just because the fertilizer prices are also pretty high, a lot of row croppers, even though they are beyond 80-mile distance, they are buying litter. They're using it for applying to their row crop fields, but at the same time they're cutting down on their fertilizer cost as well. So these are some of the strategies that we have been applying here, to prevent environmental issues of water quality, eutrophication, and stuff like that. um,
No, that's fantastic. I was listening to your answer here and really coming up with so many more questions. I think we're not going to have enough time for all of them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
But
perfectly
it's
fine. And then, yeah.
yeah, it's such an interesting area of research, and I want to perhaps follow up in one point that you were referring to, as far as using litter as a climate smart management strategy, right? So that's something that a lot of growers are thinking about these days, as far as how can they perhaps um, fix more carbon or sequester more carbon in their soils. How can they be more sustainable? Perhaps how can they um, conduct management practices that make them eligible to receive carbon
Yeah.
payments, for example. And litter is a good example of one of those
Yep.
practices. And
Hmm.
one thing that you mentioned, and I want to ask your thoughts about this, is so when you're applying litter, you do have the nutrients coming with it, but you also get the benefit of the added carbon to the soil. Um, and you did mention previously of your work related to greenhouse gas emissions. So could you talk a little bit about the use of litter, and I guess that trade-off between how much carbon potential it has to sequester in the soil, but also how much of that can be emitted back to the atmosphere as greenhouse gases, and just that trade-off on that climate smart option?
Absolutely. So litter has somewhere around 400 to 600 pounds of carbon per ton of litter. Okay. 400 to 600 pounds of carbon, that's a lot of carbon in the litter itself. And row crop farmers do not apply less than 2 tons, in one single application. I mean, the machines or um, the spreader, I mean, you cannot calibrate it to deliver less than 2 ton in a perfectly right manner. So from the bottom line is that whenever a farmer is applying chicken litter on his farm, 2 tons of litter, that's going to contribute around 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of carbon. Okay, and that's the total carbon. Now when you're applying this carbon to the soil, of course, I mean, again, there it depends like what form that carbon is. I mean, there would be some carbon which are highly labile, and then there would be some carbon which are more recalcitrant. But the matter of the fact is, applying litter alone, it contributes 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of carbon in the soil, and that helps to improve the soil organic matter. If you talk to growers and ask them, like those who have been using chicken litter, and ask them like, hey, why are you using chicken litter? Why do you like this particular organic uh, fertilizer? And the number one reason they will tell you that I'm applying litter because I want to increase the soil organic matter. So they know that by applying litter, we are increasing the soil organic matter. Of course, you are increasing the soil organic matter, but there might be some emissions again, because you are putting a carbon source, microbes will act on it, they're going to release some of the carbon back into the atmosphere, as a part of the soil process. um, we actually just started our work on looking into this issue about how much carbon and nitrous oxide and methane is released back when a farmer is putting litter in his field or applying litter in his field. So, I mean, I hope like I was able to answer your first part of the question, that how much carbon we are adding to the litter. The second part of the question, we are still working on it, so I don't have a definite answer for that.
Mhm.
But based on our preliminary data, we do see that some of those concentrations goes up as well, because basically you are feeding this carbon, and then all of a sudden you are increasing the microbial activity in the soil. So you see some of these carbon dioxide flux that is coming from the soil, from the microbe respiration and breakdown of the organic matter. And we are still trying to quantify it. So like what that we can see, like how much of that is, like what is the right, is positive balance or it's a negative balance, we do not know right now.
No, that's fantastic. Um, one thing that I've been thinking here in Georgia, and I would imagine you probably come across some of this in Alabama, is so we have a lot of growers of different crops, including some vegetable crops that are organic growers, and they may use poultry litter and other types of organic amendments as their main source of nutrients. And so, in those cases, especially for organic growers that are relying on litter for for delivering the nutrients that the crop needs to optimize yields, how does that relate as far as if you're relying solely on litter, what would be the recommendation for these growers that have to to provide all nutrients through the litter and don't have that inorganic source to complement? What
Yeah,
would be the best management practices for those types of growers?
yeah. So for vegetable production system, the nutrient requirements are little higher depending upon what vegetable you are growing. Litter, I mean, in general, if you look from we have ran analysis of litter from several sources, different places, but at the end of the day, you know 332 is what is the NPK, NP205 and K2, the fertilizer grade, for litter. Now, 1 ton of, if you are applying around 1 ton, that equates to around 20 pounds of nitrogen on a 3% basis. So, I mean, relying solely on litter for um, crops with high nitrogen demand or requirement, probably it's a little tricky. I know like many organic producers are using litter, but typically they are using composted litter, because you cannot use like a fresh litter straight on any vegetable product or any vegetables that is for human consumption. So they have to compost it first, and then they apply it. Composting also reduces the nutrient value, especially the nitrogen value of the litter, but phosphorus and potassium values are preserved. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of difficult to match, the end requirements straight from the litter. Otherwise you have to put like enormously high amount of litter, and when you do that, of course you will be able to meet the nitrogen requirement, then but then you disbalance the phosphorus and potassium, and the phosphorus requirements of crops or vegetable crops are less, two or three folds less compared to nitrogen. And that's where the problem starts. Like if you're an organic grower and using litter every year at a very high rate, you are creating phosphorus hotspot on your farm. Your farm is a phosphorus hotspot, and that can yield into a water quality issue, or result into a water quality issue. So balance is extremely important, and that's why, Leo, I said that we have invested resources and time in developing organic fertilizer with a much higher N, P, and K content than a regular of organic fertilizer. You'll not find like organic fertilizers which have a very high N or P or K. And we are concentrating. We are developing technology so that we can extract nutrients out of the litter and concentrate it back and make it like a much higher fertilizer grade. Organic fertilizer. So we are working on that, and then hopefully we'll be releasing some of those fertilizers soon. And that would be, I mean, we'll be entering into some testing phase first, and then we'll release those. So we are working on that as well.
That's really exciting. Yeah, I think that yeah, I mean, as you talked about so eloquently, this mismatch of the nutrient of how much nutrients there is in litter and how much the ratio of those nutrients that crops require. Yeah, it's really a struggle. And
Yeah,
yeah, so whenever this opportunity of this product that you're developing becomes commercial, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So the next thing I wanted to ask you is, what are the main challenges that growers of, I guess, no crop in specific, but if you do want to focus in one of them for an example, that could work as well. But what are the main challenges that producers have when they decide to incorporate poultry litter into their management? Especially when it comes down to applying that, managing it, matching the nutrients that are required, but also what they see on the economic side, on the yield side, on the economic side, and also on the environmental aspect.
Hmm. I mean, one of the greatest challenge with the litter is finding the litter at the right time, because poultry producers are not cleaning the houses every like 6 months. So say for example, some poultry grower will clean their house after 2 years or 3 years. Some will clean much sooner if there is a disease incident. So the timing between finding the litter and then application at planting is a challenge. So many growers, they kind of, whenever they get a handle to the litter, and I'm saying about or speaking about the row crop growers, they will store litter in their field and then wait um, until they are ready for planting. In the past, what I was seeing is that many row crop farmers would buy the litter and then apply it in the fall season, right, when nothing is growing. And that's where we found that it is a problem, because when you apply litter in the fall when you have nothing growing, and then in fall season and between spring, you get a lot of rainfall here in the southeast, and that rain can wash the nutrients, and especially the water soluble phosphorus or nitrogen or ammonium, like they can wash out, and then the real benefit of that litter would not be harvested just because they applied in fall, right? So we have provided information to the farmers that, hey, if you are using litter, the best window of application to get maximum benefit from litter is 2 to 3 weeks before planting. Okay, if you're applying 6 months before planting, probably you are not getting much nutrient value. Okay, so that we have overcome those challenges. Now I see that farmers apply litter probably 3 weeks or a month before they are ready to plant. Again, it depends upon how well the weather cooperates, because sometimes weather do not cooperate as well. Now, coming to the economics part, of course, if you are applying litter, in 2 tons or 3 tons, and if you are cutting down on your fertilizer rates, okay, then and then only you will gain or get a true economical benefit from litter application. But if you are not backing off on your fertilizer rates, then you are basically wasting money. You are polluting environment because you're causing issues with water quality and air quality as well. The other challenge with litter that we have seen is, when you go closer to litter, or even like not even go closer, you always smell ammonia, right? So what happens is litter has this high uric acid and so many undigested protein and a huge microbial consortia that are breaking it continuously, right? And then emitting ammonia all the time. So if you are just going and spreading the litter and not doing or incorporating it, you're losing a lot of nitrogen value. Okay, but if you spread the litter and incorporate it, you kind of preserve a lot of nitrogen. At least 20 to 30% of nitrogen. Otherwise, it just gets volatilized immediately into the atmosphere. So just by incorporating it, you will preserve the nutrient value. So the economics part, it all depends upon how much fertilizer you are cutting, how well and when did you apply it later, um, and at what rate did you apply it later. So these are the factors that comes into play when it comes to looking into the economics part of litter application for crop production.
Perfect. And that's really, I think that that point that you made, as far as if you're applying litter but not backing out on your inorganic rates, then you're probably not realizing the full benefit of the litter
Yeah.
as far as decreasing your costs, right?
Right, right. And I'll give you one example with cotton. Cotton, typically farmers who, say for example, they are not using litter, they apply around 90 to 110 units of nitrogen on cotton. Okay. So we did a research. We have like 6 ideas of data, and we saw that if a grower is applying 2 tons of litter, they should not be putting more than 45 to 55 units of nitrogen, right? So you have a straight savings of 50 units of nitrogen if you are including litter in your nutrient management program, right? But if you do not back off in your fertilizer rates, you are basically losing that. And if you are applying more nitrogen, cotton is an indeterminate crop. It just loves growing, and then there will be yield penalty. The fiber quality would be a problem. There will be disease problems. So I mean, nutrient management, especially when it comes to litter application, you have to be careful about it. So I just wanted to give you an example.
No, that's perfect, and that's really, it's really interesting. We see we actually, last season I worked with a grower that he had a very similar system to what you're describing, where he applied two tons of chicken litter, and he was growing cotton, and he was applying about that amount of fertilizer side dress with inorganic sources. And really, his question to us was, am I applying too much? Could I cut back on my rate, and be more profitable here? So we actually ran a study, and we found out that we could reduce rates, at least with data from this 1 year,
Yeah.
and be more profitable, since he's getting that nutrient from the litter itself. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, it's a very, very interesting point. Now, let me ask you this: so if a grower is using litter, and you did provide a number here. So 2 to 3 tons of chicken litter can save around 50 pounds of N per acre, and depending on fertilizer prices, that could be a good amount of saving for that
Yeah.
grower.
Mhm.
But so if a grower is planning on doing that, and they come to the side dress timing when they're deciding, if and how much of that inorganic fertilizer rate they're going to apply, if it comes to that and they are unsure, maybe it looks like the crop is stressed. Perhaps there was a lot of rainfall that leached that nutrient from the litter. Do you have any thoughts here as far as how can growers assess really, if the nutrient from the litter had its role, or perhaps if it was lost and then the grower has to compensate?
Yeah. So one thing about litter is that the nutrient release from litter is very slow. So that's why poultry litter is considered like a slow release fertilizer. It's basically feeding the plant not just with primary macronutrients but also the micronutrients in a very slow fashion, and that's what the plants need. So again, it depends like how much litter the farmer applied and how much rain occurred after his application. But if he is seeing like a really poor stand, the crop is looking dull and then it's like yellow, yes, of course, then they would think about adding more nutrients because nobody would like to take a risk. So the best thing would be to do a tissue testing to confirm like how much nitrogen is there in the plant, and then make plans to apply commercial or synthetic fertilizer once it comes to side dressing, especially nitrogen. So yeah, you have to be kind of like looking and using your best judgment, looking into how much rain happened. But yeah, litter is a slow release fertilizer. It just supplies nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in a very slow fashion. Okay, so let me back up. Um, when I say potassium, I should not say potassium is slow release from litter. We have seen that when you apply litter and if it rains, litter releases 85% of its potassium pretty quickly because most of the potassium is water soluble potassium, and with rain it dissolves that potassium and releases into the soil solution. But if it has rained quite a bit, then there could be leaching of potassium as well from the soil profile, especially from the root zone. For phosphorus, again, phosphorus is a little tricky depending upon what is the soil type, because even if the litter releases phosphorus, it gets reabsorbed on the soil, and then soil supplies phosphorus back to the plants, right? And then nitrogen is also dependent upon the moisture. Quite a bit of nitrogen that is present in litter is in organic form, and it has to mineralize and break down into this inorganic, primarily ammonical and nitrate nitrogen forms, and that release is little slow. But we have found that first 30 days of litter application are very crucial. Like if you applied litter, most nutrient releases happen during first 30 days after application. Like you see like a flush of nutrient mineralization, and after 30 days everything gets like very slow. So there's a very interesting nutrient release pattern of poultry litter. I mean, I'm so fascinated. I mean, we had tested it and we say like, man, 30 days window is the right time if you want to get the most benefit from the litter application.
So, if you could talk about the Alabama Phosphorus Index and how are growers using that to make sure that they're doing a good job in managing phosphorus in their soils, and also how attentive are they to this information coming from the university, these facts about how to manage phosphorus properly at the field level?
So Alabama phosphorus index, it is still an additive index. Many states have multiplicative index or component based index, but Alabama P index is still additive index, and we have been investigating it about the functionality first of this tool for Alabama conditions. And we have edge of the field monitoring studies going on right now, and we are trying to use that data to calibrate the model. We have found in many cases that Alabama P index is not actually capturing the P loss risk because of some issues in the way the weighing factors are given, and we are trying to work on it. But when it comes to adoption of phosphorus index for nutrient management, I have seen that those farmers which are receiving equip payments from NRCS, they are mandated to follow the phosphorus index. The other thing is, many growers who are producing litter, they sell their litter, and that litter goes away from the farm. So meaning like it is not being applied in the same place where it is generated, right? So that's a good thing. And from that perspective, the farmers are watching out P index, especially if they are getting equip payments. But again, right now we feel that we need to improve this tool. And the other thing that where we have invested quite a bit is understanding the phosphorus storage capacity of soil. And then I'll tell you an example. Like, say, for example, there's a farm where the P index says that it is categorized as a very high risk. And then immediately when it's high risk, then it says like you should not be applying or putting any organic based fertilizer, right? When we have collected the soil samples, we have found that those soils have very high phosphorus adsorption capacities and storage capacities as well, right? So how come a tool which says a high risk, and your soil samples are telling like, yeah, it's not high risk because whatever phosphorus you're adding is getting sorbed and it's not releasing it in the soil solution. So there is quite a bit of discrepancy between this tool and the way it's being used. So we are trying to evaluate it and recalibrate it. So we are going to bring some new parameters and improve this tool so that it does not kind of does not like over predicts the risk of P loss when we know that the P loss risk is not very high.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that.
It's time for our famous three. Explore the future of agriculture with KWS, a global leader in innovation and sustainable farming practices. Uncover the exceptional qualities of our hybrid rye, cultivating a legacy for a greener tomorrow. Visit kws.com/US for more information and for dealer locations. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
All right, so I think we reached the point of those last three questions that we ask every guest in our podcast. So the first one that I want to ask you is if you have any favorite crop-related book or resource that you could share with us and that you think would be interesting for our audience to be aware of.
I will say, like, I don't have a specific crop book, but I'll tell you that, the extension, go to extension website. They have tons of resources, tons of information. I'm really fascinated whenever I read an extension article because they're written in a very plain language, catered to growers, to general public, and it's very resourceful. So those are my favorites, when it comes to any crop book. So I'll say, like, read extension articles that are from the university extension system, that comes from the university extension system. And I'll tell you, you will never regret that you wasted your time. You'll always learn something new that would be practical and of immediate application as well.
Perfect. And also science, fact-based, right?
Yes, it's all science-based, absolutely. Yes.
A lot of information online that we can find, but extension resources are really, really great resources to be easy to understand, but also science-based.
Right. They're all science-based and written by the professionals,
Absolutely.
This is a Google time. We are living in a Google era. We ask Google, hey, Google, tell me this. And, you'll see that sometimes they tell you the right thing, sometimes they tell you the wrong thing, but if you go into extension website and read the articles, they're never going to tell you wrong thing. Everything that is written out there is the right stuff. So
absolutely Perfect. So our next, the second of the three questions here is, what is your favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Favorite book or resource outside of agriculture? Well, that's a very a tough question to
Yeah.
ask, because I kind of like rely on multiple sources for information, not just sticking at one place. Books, of course, gives you knowledge, but then if you go and talk to a farmer, they give you a lot of practical questions that sometimes we, even as a scientist, question that how can we solve these real world problems, right? So yeah, information from multiple sources is extremely important, especially when we are living in a world where we have a lot of information from a lot of different sources. So yeah, I mean, I will say that I rely on multiple sources for information, besides like book as well. um, yeah.
Perfect. No, absolutely. And I guess the last question here would be, in your opinion, what sets successful crop professionals in academia, in industry, whatever has been your experience, what do you think are what sets those professionals apart from those that perhaps are not as successful? And again, across different sectors, going from
Yeah.
academia, industry, as well.
One thing that probably many successful people follow is they have a very open set of minds. Like they're very open minded and not kind of like a tunnel based thinking and thought process, like, oh no, this is not going to work, this is what I have been doing from last 50 years and I don't want to change things. So like that open mindedness, and always, if you're eager to learn from others, learn from people. I mean, learning could come from several different aspects, but if you're exposed to learning from people, the real world experiences probably help you a lot, right? For me, I'll tell you, like, when I say I'm a system scientist, I have developed a way to think from a bigger standpoint, and how do we connect all these things together. um, I really like the quote of Steve Jobs, who was telling that we can connect the dots, uh, not looking backwards. I'm sorry, we can connect the dot when we looking backwards, right? You have all these things that you can connect together, then you can understand like why I did that, or why this particular phenomenon happens. So yeah, open-mindedness, information from several sources, always willingness to learn. I mean, these are the key for successful people, and especially, I mean, whether you are in this profession of feeding the world, whether you are a farmer, whether you are an extension agent or an educator, uh, you have to tackle or take your step with an open-mindedness, and that's how you're going to succeed.
Perfect. Nice. That's great. Well, I think with that, we wrap up our episode for today. Rishi, it was an honor to have you as our guest today. I learned a lot with you, and I'm sure our audience also will, as they're listening to this podcast. So I do want to thank you for your time and being in the Crop Science podcast today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Leo. I mean, I truly enjoyed talking to you. I mean, again, it also helps to share information, but at the same time, it also helps you think about the information, right? So I learned
Absolutely.
a lot as well from you while talking. So thank you.
Thank you so much.